All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our code of conduct tonight. We do have on the closed captioning, and in case anybody wants that. Also, this meeting is being recorded so that we can post it to the website at a later time in case anybody wants to go back and hear comments from folks. Just a little bit of parameters, how things are going to work. Our Director of Student Services, Anna Warmbrand, will do a short presentation. And then afterwards, we will take any questions or comments from you. If you would please put your name in the chat if you want to speak. That way we will call on you in the order that your name gets put in. That way we don't have people talking over one another. It just makes it a little bit easier. So with that, Anna, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This looks to be, and things can change, what our last community forum that we're going to have right at this exact moment. And so thank you all for joining us and for taking the time to be here. I know that it was advertised that Dr. Trujillo would come. Something has come up for him. So probably he won't be joining us this evening, but he might. The last time he was able to join us for a short period of time. So we'll keep that open. And if he does come, then I'll definitely just take a pause and turn the floor over to him. So just wanted to say thank you again for joining us this evening and talking about our wonderful code of conduct. So as Ms. Leonard said, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to give just a quick presentation, and then we're going to open up the floor to any discussion items or pieces and parts that you would like to discuss. And please put the name in the chat, and we'll go ahead and answer them. And thank you for the comment on the painting. This is a family friend who passed away. And he's from El Salvador. He's a musician and he painted this. And so I always like it as a background. Reminds me of good things in life. So thank you for that. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll get started here. Okay. So welcome to our Code of Conduct Community Forum. I believe this is number 14, maybe number 15. And some of you have gone ahead and you have seen me at your school sites already, or you've seen one of my team, Andrea Martinez or Raquel Garcia, Eddie Villalobos, Charlotte Brown Patterson, Tina Escalante, Melanie Schiappini, right? I have a small but mighty crew, and you may have seen those folks at these community forums or at your school sites getting your student input or helping me take notes when I do our presentation. So I just want to acknowledge the student relations team who's been hanging with me through all of these. So appreciate so much. Why are we revising the code of conduct, ladies and gentlemen? Why would one do that? Well, every 3 to 5 years, it's good practice to gather stakeholder input to revise such documents such as our code of conduct, which is the document we use to guide our actions when it comes to student behavior. And post-pandemic, I think we all can agree the world has changed since the pandemic, and as one staff member today at a school site mentioned, is continually changing, and nothing will feel like it was before. And so we want to make sure that our documents and pieces and parts that inform how we treat kids and how we treat each other are looked at again after the pandemic. There's an internal steering committee that helps inform the revisions that we will recommend and take to our school board either at the end of May or beginning of June. These are representative of many stakeholders. We have Brian Lambert. He is regional superintendent and he is representing all district leadership. I am on the committee as the facilitator of the process. I do not vote or decision make in these pieces and parts, but I facilitate the process of stakeholder input, including this forum. We have voices of equity at the table. We have program coordinators, program managers, and Native American Student Services, Mexican American Student Services, African American Student Services, Pan-Asian Student Services, and Refugee Services represented. We have ELI membership. We have 2 elementary principals, 2 middle school principals, and 2 high school principals. And we have Judy Mitchell, who represents our K-12 system for our exceptional education students. And we have our TEA representatives. We have a classified representative, and I do want to let you know that we're also doing a tour of this presentation to all of our classified groups that, you know, food services, health services, transportation services, IT services, safety and security, maintenance and operations. And so and food service, I think I said that already. So that was a delight last week to meet with those folks. So we are definitely making the rounds to make sure we have appropriate classified representation as well. We have 1 lawyer that sits on our committee, and we have parents as well. And our admin assistant, my admin assistant, Tina Escalante, but Tina Escalante and all of the folks I mentioned are with me throughout this process. So those are our representative stakeholders. This is the processes that we've been through. In January, we established norms for our committee. We looked at what structures we'd have for community forums and student forums, and we created the content just like this presentation. And in February, we held in-person community forums in each of our regions. And then we started our student forums, and we're continuing our student forums where our program specialists and program coordinator are going out to all of our comprehensive high schools, and they are meeting with students throughout the day and getting their input. And they have a presentation they give, and they look through the code of conduct with them, and we're getting our student input. For those sites that have a restorative practice facilitator, they are also facilitating that process. So we have a lot of student feedback that we're collecting. In March, we went ahead and created survey content, and I know that you all have been receiving those reminders for the survey as well as reminders for this evening. And I really appreciate that that you're getting those and that you're responding. We want to have 80% of our school sites respond with staff input. And if every school site just got 100 surveys back, staff and families combined, then we would very much meet our target goal of 10,000 stakeholder voices for this initiative to go to the school board. We are starting our individual school site code of conduct tours. We started that in March, and we will continue those through April. We are also now beginning to analyze the data that's coming back from those surveys. And so we're just starting to get that starting today to look at for our internal committee and analyze those pieces and parts. And once that's done, then we'll come up with some revision recommendations. I will complete a program impact analysis in May, which will be posted publicly on the site for input. And then at the end of that time, either the end of May or beginning of June, I will present the recommended revisions, representative of all stakeholders, to our school board for approval. So our school board does make the final approval and say on any revisions we would have to our code of conduct. They are the decision makers in this. We are simply presenting revisions that we would like to see. This is your code of conduct. We always provide a link in case we have to go back to that piece and part. This is it. Voila, this is our community forum. And yeah, thank you for being here. The one really important piece of this is the email for the TUSD code of conduct at TUSD1.org. That's the way that you can reach out to our department and give feedback if you don't want to share at these community forums. Then that's a great way to give input on these processes. And now we'll get to the meat and potatoes, or if you're a veggie, the potatoes and green beans, which is delicious sounding. So hopefully some of you are making dinner and listening in one ear. I know it is about 5:40 here. These are our biggest issues that have come up with stakeholders thus far, although there's definitely some other pieces and parts that do come in. So I'm just going to read these off and give you some context, and then we'll open up the forum for all of your voices. And if you don't want to discuss any of these particular pieces and parts, that's perfectly fine. If you have another agenda in terms of what sits in the code of conduct that you think needs to be revised, then this is your time to go ahead and share that as well. What I will ask, though, is that if you have a very individualized piece that you'd like to share, either a concern about your student, your child in terms of discipline, or a concern about an administrator or some piece and part like that, that you just go ahead and save that for another time, and you can go ahead and just put in the chat that you'd like to speak with me, and Ms. Chiappini or Mr. Villalobos or any of my people will be more than happy to share our 2648 phone number. That's our line, and Ms. Tina Escalante will be happy to take your information. So by all means, that's how we do that piece and part. So number one, do you believe it is appropriate for the dress code to be included in the code of conduct? If so, what level of infraction? So is the dress code appropriate to be in a code of conduct in which there are interventions and consequences matched to each behavior? And if you think yes, then what level? Level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1 being our least restrictive, all the way to 5, which can include an expulsion. Number 2, currently after a student's first fight, the consequence includes 1 day of suspension with a restorative mediation, and then the student is allowed back onto campus. Does this seem appropriate? So for a first fight, if they agree to restorative mediation, they are suspended for 1 day and they may return back. If they get in a second fight and they agree to restorative mediation, then they're suspended for 3 days. And then 7 days are held in abeyance, which is essentially like keeping the suspension in an administrator's pocket. And if they have another fight, then that suspension is enacted and they go ahead and serve those 7 days. If they don't agree to restorative for a first fight, then they have 3 days of out of school suspension. And if they don't agree to a restorative for their second fight, then they're at their 10 days. So that's that consequence. Number 3, currently the consequences for a first drug offense includes 1 day of suspension and a class about drug use, drug awareness, safety, and health. Should this be a continued practice, consequence, intervention? So there's a lot to unpack there. So if a child is using illicit drugs, and this includes marijuana, then, and they agree to a drug awareness class, which our counselors and social workers provide and there's district resources for, then they are out of school suspended for 1 day. If not, then they're out of school suspended for 3. And it's the same as the second offense for a fight, 3 days out with a drug awareness class, 7 in abeyance, or 10 all total. So that's how drug offenses are handled here currently. Do you think that that is appropriate still? Number 4, truancy. Truancy is currently a level 1. Is that an appropriate level? And last but not least, and this one has been definitely a hot button item here. In the survey, we had it sit with consequences for a level 3, and that was intentional. Although typically, if you look at the code, it will say level 2, but that's peer-to-peer. So if you're defiant and disrespectful to a peer, then that's a level 2 offense currently. If you use inappropriate language with a peer, that is currently a level 2 offense. If, however, the behavior is ongoing and escalating with a staff member, either inappropriate language or defiance and disrespect, then you can issue short-term suspension and it becomes a level 3. So that's when you look at the survey piece and part. I've just had questions about that. We wanted to look at how we address defiance and disrespect and see what folks' opinions were on when it came to staff members, which sits at a level 3, not a level 2. So these are the pieces and parts that we've had very rich discussions on for the past month and a half. If there's other things that you would like to share, by all means. So I'm ready to open up the forum. Who is our first person who'd like to share this evening?
Thank you. The first person is Susanna Peterson. Susanna?
Hello, hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Hi, I am a teacher, and also mom and a grandma.
Wonderful.
And I had just a quick question and also a concern.
Okay.
Okay, so within the code of conduct, I know you have talked about the levels.
Mhm.
I believe that there are some things that have been, it could be because of pandemic, after pandemic, or because whatever reason, it seems to me that the students are facing a lot more anger, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
and the use of drugs. However, when you say that they will be going to a class, right?
Mhm.
If they
Yes.
agree, whatever. What is it, the involvement of the parents? Because sometimes the parents are also providing, not providing, but having those things available at home for them.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So
I do. Oh, very much.
how are the parents involved in that class? How I believe that when the students are bringing drugs to the school, or they should be suspended. That's my own opinion.
Mhm.
But also, if they're going to participate in this class, how are the parents involved in this?
Mhm. And so the parents do have to, they're notified, of course, of the suspension and consequences, and they do have to agree that their child will go to this drug awareness class. But aside from that piece and part, there isn't a requirement for them to participate. And it's really timely that you brought this up, because I just gave this presentation to another group of folks just about an hour ago. And some folks had brought up, what could we ask that the parents participate with their child and make that a piece and part that would lessen the suspension, because then you would know you would have parental support. So we're definitely going to capture that feedback, because you are not the first person that I've heard from that even today. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Oh, you are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Our next speaker is Cameron Rodriguez.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for taking me. I'm Cameron Rodriguez. I'm a teacher at Rincon High School. I teach 9th through 12th grade. And I just want to preface my comment by saying that I love working for TUSD. I love Rincon. I work with amazing people. I
Mhm.
love my job.
Awesome.
But my main concern is this. Now, I understand the code of conduct, whether we all admit it or not, is sort of a shield to protect the school district from liability. And in that respect, going to any length to prevent any student or parent for even considering that a disciplinary issue is discriminatory is justified, as long as it avoids something else like the Mendoza-Fisher lawsuit happening again. But sometimes it seems a bit unfair that in disciplinary issues, the needs of individual students seem to be sometimes put in front of the whole. Students figure out how to bend the code of conduct to their will, teachers get thrown under the bus, and we as educators all have to individually figure out how to preserve our learning environment despite disruptive behavior from students who are given a pass again and again to do what they need to, as long as they say the right things in restorative justice circles, they're clear. It seems like the implication sometimes is that we move on with the assumption that we won't really get any help with dealing with a student's disciplinary issues, as the district is risk averse to the extreme. And I worry sometimes that as long as the district is sure it won't get called racist, then it's just as willing it's willing to just about let anything slide in regard to discipline. And whether or not that's keeping a disruptive student in a class, whether that's making sure that a student doesn't feel discriminated against. And I think as my job, it's important for me to put all of my students and every class as a whole in the front of my mind. And if that means getting help with an individual student, I really need to put my whole class first. So I just hope that you may consider in moving forward, giving teachers more of a voice in regard to escalating things to suspensions and that sort of thing, because as much as I care that students get second chances and that they're not pipelined or any of that, that's all not intentional. I think it's really important that we consider those students who don't act up, who don't have disciplinary issues, who don't disrupt the class in any way. I think it's important we put those kids first and then consider whether or not a student is being, who is already disrupting the class, is being treated unfairly and such. I recognize that this is a pipe dream. And like I said, I love my job regardless. My administration is wonderful. I just want to make sure that my classes work and that they run smoothly. And as much as I care about an individual student feeling singled out or picked on or whatever, I feel like if the teacher attests to them being disruptive, that word of the teacher should be taken with a lot more weight than it currently is. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. I appreciate that. And I know that looking at how we protect and honor the majority of our students on our campuses is really critical. The perception that you shared, sits in a space where we weren't really in control of how we looked at our code of conduct because of the unitary status plan, which is why Dr. Trujillo is the second we got out of our unitary status plan, right? And we were able to now make our decisions about how we address student behavior. This is exactly why now Dr. Trujillo says we have to look at revising our code of conduct because as a district, not just site administrators or teachers, our hands were tied in those specific pieces and parts. And so now is the time to look at that. So I appreciate your input.
All right. The next speaker is Ruth Hatton. Ruth?
Hello, sorry, had a technical difficulty there.
No problem.
So I'm Ruth Hatton. I am a teacher at Seacrest Middle School. I have comments for a few of the things up on the PowerPoint there. So the first thing is dress code. I think it's fine as a level 1. I hate that it needs to be there, but there are some of those students that just feel the need to push the boundaries. I don't think we really need to push the pajamas thing. I think that can be written out. If they want to wear their pajamas to school, whatever. It's the, when they're wearing sexually explicit shirts or, things that are truly inappropriate. I think that, that does need to be addressed and they do need to change, but we don't need to do any exclusionary discipline or anything like that. The second one, for the students' first fight, this is very timely for me. I just had a brawl in my classroom last week. I teach 8th grade, but both of these boys are over 6 feet tall. It was not a safe situation. They were truly going at it. They started throwing chairs at each other across the classroom. There were other students in the classroom. It was not safe. And I felt powerless. And because for each of them, it was their first fight, they got a day. And I'm sorry, but once you start throwing chairs around my classroom, one day is not enough. I don't care that they agreed to mediation. One day for throwing classrooms, it creating an extremely unsafe environment. I don't think that sets the tone for how truly damaging their behavior was to the other students in that situation.
Mhm.
I mean, one of the students has been suspended at least 5 times this year, 2 long-term, but because this was his first fight, he got a day,
Mhm.
right? So I understand taking things individually is necessary, but that situation, I think just one day is not setting the tone that this behavior is unacceptable.
Mhm.
I that's just my personal opinion from experience. Drugs in middle school, they are rampant right now. And again, one day slap on the wrist, they don't care. They're just going to stay home and get high that day, right? That's not it. I don't know that the solution is more exclusion,
Mhm.
but I know that just one day, a slap on the wrist is not deterring these kids from getting high. Like some of these kids, I could get a contact high from them. Like they go to the bathroom and they come back and it's just ridiculous. The whole classroom reeks. And nothing's being done. Truancy, I think I agree with someone who spoke at the last community forum. They said that truancy needs to be broken up into 2 different categories. And I 100% agree. Those kids that just don't come to school, no, suspending them isn't going to make a difference because they're not coming anyways. The problem we're having on my campus right now is the students are coming to school, but they are not going to class. They're either walking out of class or they're just ditching for the whole day and they're finding places. I'm during my planning periods, I need to get up and use the restroom. There are constantly kids running around, and it's not like we don't have staff. We have monitors walking around, taking care of things, but they're just finding ways to, and I think there needs to be some sort of consequence, be it ISS or, something to keep them in the classrooms. There's no motivation for them right now to stay in their classrooms. And then the defiance and disrespect, I don't know what to say about that one. It's some of the things that students say to me are just, it blows my mind that they even think that it is acceptable to say, not just to an adult, but just to another human being. And they, I don't know, sorry, that's just my 2 cents. I really do love my job, I swear. It's just kind of a minefield right now. Thank you.
Mhm. I appreciate your input. I will tell you that my takeaway, and we're of course taking notes on all of what is being shared, is looking at the truancy in different levels and circumstances has now surfaced over the past week and a half in terms of stakeholder input. So that's something for sure that will be taken back to the committee next week, because that's very important to look at in different levels. And then there's almost virtually nobody that we've met with that feels that one day out is an appropriate consequence. Middle school, high school. So just so you know, you're in good company when it comes to stakeholder input in that regard as well.
All right, great, thank you. A reminder, if you want to speak, please put your name in the chat. Our next speaker is Megan Andrews. Megan?
Hello. I just have a question. I teach at VC Elementary School, and we found out, I think it was last week, that there's a law now that K to 4th grade cannot be suspended. So what are you going to do in that case they can't have in-school suspension, they can't get suspended, and they do fight. I've seen fights there, not as much as when I was in middle school, but there are some. And I'm just wondering, what is it that you're going to plan on doing in that case?
And so we have had our folks trained, our school administrators on our K-4 law since October, when our district lawyers came back from their law conference and shared with us that this is now something that exists in Arizona. So this isn't a TUSD thing. This is a state law, and it definitely has hindered administrators' ability to issue suspension. The K-4 law for 5 and 6-year-olds, you cannot out of school suspend or in school suspend 5 or 6-year-olds unless they bring a loaded gun to school. So that's the piece and part. For 7, 8, and 9-year-olds, there's a pretty substantial criteria that has to be met for myself or regional superintendent to approve out of school suspension. And so we are looking at extensive intervention pieces and parts. We will see, and you will see more of this occurring, what we call reassigning a kid. So we're not sending them home. They're not going to an in-school suspension room, but they do need a break from the environment they're consistently in. So that's a piece and part that we've worked with, but it's a really difficult one. What I've heard is that there will be some adaptations to that law for next year, but those won't be released until the school year starts. And so we have to operate in terms of how we look at our code of conduct as if that K-4 law will sit in the same space. We do have a set of folks that work exclusively on that committee with the elementary code of conduct piece. And just this last week, I had our district lawyer sit with them and look at those options. So it is being talked about in terms of what flexibilities and options we have, because we know that our youngest learners can have bad days, and those bad days can look really substantial and have huge impacts for our elementary community. And having a day off sometimes was appropriate for the rest of the classroom environment and the staff. And now those options are not the same. So we are definitely looking at those pieces and parts. You're not the first person to bring it up, not even close. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Megan was our last speaker, unless someone else wants to speak, or if you all could put your name in the chat, or you could raise your hand if for some reason you can't put your name in the chat. Rosie Ramon, I see your name.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the on what they had said about suspension. I know that my daughter, she's 10, and she had recently gotten suspended. And it was an incident that happened at school, something she had said, but they were going to give her in-house suspension. But when the officer had came, he questioned her and asked her, because she had to relive everything that she did the day before, and got her angry again to where they suspended her, because there was a certain individual, a boy, that was bullying a number of students, and he left and came back. And so whatever happened occurred that day. Is like, I just wanted to make a comment off of that, like how the student that, was causing all this trouble and, getting suspended, and then starting a fight, same thing with these, there's like, my kids, I know my kids are not perfect, because I've gone to their school and they act up, and I'm like, oh my God, like, is that really my child? And I have to step in and I have to tell them, what are you doing? Why are you acting like that? And that's the thing that I always remind, like, other parents, know your children, know who they are when they are at school, because they're a whole different person. And I always say that, like, some of the teachers are overwhelmed with so many students. And sometimes I wonder how they do it, because I have two, and they're, oh my God, they drive me up the wall and I'm about ready to beat them down or something. But I'm just like, how do teachers deal with this? But then like that, but you have these like bullies and stuff that constantly do it. Like, what I know in the code of conduct is that they know they don't tolerate it. There's a lot of kind schools, but it's constantly every day. And there's mediations there, but I think it should be with the parents as well, because it starts at home. It starts at home and it brought to school. And I know I discipline my kids. They get timeouts. They get electronics taken away from them for weeks and months because of the way they act. And I have just recently just took my kids out of public school for being bullied. And I don't know, it's a lot to deal with. And you know, I commend all your teachers that are here on here because God bless. I feel for you all because man, my two kids alone, and when I walk into the school and I hear some of the things the kids say, especially the assemblies I attended, some of these kids are very disrespectful. They're very rude. They don't have respect for even guests that come to the school. And you know, I really commend you all. I just wanted to make that comment because it is a lot. It is a lot. And bless your hearts for dealing with our children. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the thank yous to the staff. I know as we get, you know, towards the end of the year, we're all feeling a little bit of fatigue. And I also appreciate you acknowledging that what you see at home may not be what occurs at school. And just being vigilant about being open with your kids is important. So you do know if bullying is happening, you can notify the school before the child feels like they need to lay hands on another kid to stop it, because that's absolutely not what we want to have happen. And they may not always tell someone at the school because that's not necessarily always something our kids are comfortable with. So thank you for your input. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Our next speaker is Morgan O'Donnell. Morgan.
Evening, everyone. This year I'm the ISI teacher at Palo Verde.
Oh.
So yeah, I'm hearing everything that everybody's saying because I've been there on the front line, so I understand it. I had a couple of questions pertaining to the code of conduct and then a couple of comments. The one is the leaving of campus. Is that going to be moved up on tiers and levels? Because right now, my understanding, it's a level 1, so it's just a. I hate to put it this way, but it's just a slap on the wrist and move on. And I know it's rampant through the district, and I know it's a major safety issue, especially when the kids leave and come back. So that was the first question I had. I don't know where that's going. The second was, I know everybody has this, the disrespect from students. It's a continued thing. It's not once, hey, a student had a bad day. I know every teacher I've worked with, cool, we understand, everybody has a bad day, but then it's repeated and it's repeated and repeated. And I know I have a very good rapport with most of my students, so I can get them not to use the N-word or to cuss or to watch, but there's some of them, they just light teachers up. So is that one going to be actually enforced? Because I haven't seen it this year. And I'm not seeing it not being enforced as far as probably not recognized as much, because we've been using that the trauma and everything, which I understand, but at the same time there's a certain point when the trauma just becomes a behavior and a ritual and a culture, and right now we're in the middle of they get to do whatever they want and we got to stand there. And so that was my other the other one was I wrote it down here. Where is it at? Level up. Being the ISI teacher, I go over the student code of conduct with them. I explain the tiers. I explain that, you know, this is a tier 1, this is a tier 2. Once you've done this a couple of times, admin can move it up. They can tier up another tier. Problem is, there's not a lot of documentation there. Send a student to the office because they cussed me out or they left class or whatever. Well, if it's not documented, I mean, we've been doing pretty good about it. But they're like, wait, what? And I go, oh, here's a cell phone policy. What do you mean? I got a general rule. I was at Tucson High for 3 years. I gave you 3 warnings. I took the phone, I took it down to security. Your parents and guardians got to come pick it up, or admin got to deal with you. We haven't done that at Palo Verde. I've been very, I don't want to say lenient, but I've been very understanding. But when I explain this to them, they look at me at that glazed look like, where'd you get this at? Well, the cell phone policy is 2012. The student code of conduct, I tell them every time you register, there's a little box there that you click and you say, I've read that and I've understood that. And they look at me and go, yeah, so maybe you guys should start reading that in the user agreement on your cell phone and your electronics. So when we go over it, so that's my other comment there. most students do not even understand that code of conduct, neither do the parents. So when you're calling them and saying, hey, your student does this, and this, and they're like, and well, this is a violation, and you can't just yell at a teacher, and you can't just yell at other students and throw chairs and do all this stuff without consequences. And I know I'm hearing a lot of this because I hear it at school every day, like, why this, why that? And I understand some of the tier process, but is that going to be explained and made sure that we got this incoming students? And I have heard about the fires at the elementary and the junior highs getting ready to come into the high school. So we're going to make sure that that's explained to these parents and students. Hey, we've got to crack, not say shouldn't use the word crack down, but we need to enforce these rules, because being from the government teacher social studies, there's the social contract that we need to bring back into our schools, because right now, so I'm feeling everybody's aggravation because I deal with it, but I turned most of it around. But those were the two: tearing up with leaving campus, and the disrespect for staff. Is it actually being enforced, and will it be enforced?
So I'll talk to the truancy piece. That is for sure something that sits heavily on our site administrators' minds, particularly in secondary, high school, and middle school. I'm really looking at what are appropriate consequences. Thus far, most stakeholders have shared that having out-of-school suspension for a kid who doesn't come to school is not an appropriate consequence. That's actually their jam. They don't come to school. So suspending them for not coming is just pretty much just exactly what's happening, right? So making sure that there's an appropriate consequence that keeps kids in school, but also shows them that we take seriously their attendance in their classrooms. And so looking at that piece in part is really paramount, and one of the really huge tasks that the steering committee does at our secondary level. I don't think any of them are A-okay with leaving truancy at a level 1, but we also don't want to out of school suspend kids who don't want to come to class, because that's literally what they're trying to do. So where does the consequence sit? So that's been the really rich discussion from stakeholders as well as our steering committee. The defiance and disrespect piece, when I came into this position as the director of student relations, there's myself and the regional superintendent that can approve disciplinary elevations for levels, and that can direct principals how to utilize the code of conduct. And one of the pieces and parts that I saw in taking this position was that our site administrators had really heavily sat in a level 2 space when it came to defiance and disrespect, which is appropriate because it was labeled a level 2. For me, having coming right out of site administration and serving the Sunnyside Unified School District, I know that defiance and disrespect to adults in our buildings is really unacceptable, and it corrodes so many pieces and parts of a school community. And so the deeper I got into the position this year, the more I have allowed and really worked with our regionals and worked with principals to say, if you have defiance and disrespect of staff, then you can use exclusionary consequence for our older learners so that your staff feels safe in their school. So that's a cognitive shift for some folks, as they have been handing in paperwork to get approvals for that for a while. And so I'm trying to remove that barrier so that they can ensure safety. But that is absolutely something that needs to be looked at when we revise the code of conduct. And then, yeah, so those two pieces and parts for sure. And then the education piece that you addressed in terms of making sure people know how to use it and utilize it. Once these revisions hopefully are recommended and approved from the school board, then making sure that that's widely spread and we can guarantee people know it is the third really, really critical piece.
I had one more comment or maybe question. I don't know if this has been brought up before, but upon their return, say they get a day suspension or they get 3-day suspension, can they be brought back in ISS or ISI for that transition period for that 1 day to bring them back? To make sure, hey, you are on the right set to come back to school, that you're not just going to come back and go, oh, I got 3 free days off, I'm back now and I'm going to do whatever I want. You know, is there something in the plans for that, or is that just?
That's a flexibility piece in part that our secondary administrators are looking at. It is a common practice that we have when a student comes out of a long-term suspension, but it hasn't been utilized or put in our code of conduct for short term. And so thank you for bringing that up. That's actually probably just the second time we've heard that surface. So we'll take a note of that to bring to the committee.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Our next speaker is Palmer Shimon.
Good evening. Thank you for calling on me. Wow, it's so wonderful to hear such a diversity of thought from elementary through high school, secondary, and people who deal directly with discipline. I'm just going to kind of pick up there, and I want to go through a number of these areas that are on my mind. I want to start by making the statement that kids are kids. And that relates, I'll come back to that in just a second. When we're talking about these issues and behaviors and discipline and what can we do, and I totally agree, right? We have this idea that we want to keep kids in school. And for me, in my classroom, we do a social contract. That was mentioned earlier. I'm the only teacher on my class that has and develops a social contract in which I want direct input. And I ask students, how do they want to be treated by me? How do they think I want to be treated by them? How are we going to resolve conflict? We go through this entire process. That's not to say that teachers don't develop classroom norms or agreements, but those agreements are usually a list of rules that don't deal with so much procedure. So there's a mixed thing here. And overall, what I hear, and particularly for our district, is we're talking about mindsets and the value of education, in which there's a real disconnect. And I said the first year we came back from COVID, I had a much more successful year being out and online that year of COVID than I had my first year back from COVID. That's a national trend. It's not just specific to our district, but looking at and attending workshops across the nation. I'm from being in South Carolina and Florida, and I attended a week-long conference in Chicago over that summer between this year, this last school year and this school year. And so there's a lot of things that are going on here within our community that we need to try to find the balance. The other part of that I just heard mentioning is when we're bumping up discipline, right? We're bumping up and we're moving those levels from a level 1 to a level 2. I don't feel that most staff understand how tied administration is with what they can do in support. We had a breakout session today in our PD. The principal talked for a few minutes. They were looking for some feedback. They wanted some honest feedback. So they were leaving the PD. It was being facilitated basically by us and one person coming in. We were already in different groups. It was not based on a grade level or anything like that. It was basically to be honest about what was happening. People who created T-charts, created just, a split thing, what is working, what's not working. Over and over and over again, I saw on those posters, what's not working is a lack of support. And that lack of support feels like, because principals are tied in some of the decisions that they are making, they are ignoring requests for support, or they don't get to it. Which leads me into the very first item that we have here, which is dress code. In previous discussions, they've talked about doing away with the dress code, not having it as part of the code of conduct. And I want to emphasize that we have a variety of schools that have uniforms and schools that don't have uniforms. Regardless of whether we're a uniform school or not a uniform school, we need a dress code policy from the district, whether that is a separate expectation or part of the code of conduct. It needs to happen. We heard comments earlier about, and I've made comments about people who are wearing subcultural costumes. Pajamas are not the issue. Someone coming to school in, 10-inch, a boy perhaps in spiked heels and fishnet stockings, or a girl wearing chokers and collars and leather outfits, or short skirts and that sort of thing, which makes other people feel uncomfortable is something that we have to consider in our cultural environment of itself. So I would say that if we have a code of conduct that is not including a dress code, then we need to have a separate dress code that deals with those sort of things. And the reason why I mention uniform schools as a separate is because we have all these issues of disrespect in our classroom that teachers are talking about. I'll just give you an example, right? So we're talking in our teams, we have a student that's cussing out a teacher, using the F word, cussing out other students, using the F word, sometimes slurs, this sort of thing. They get sent to a buddy teacher, there's documentation, incident file, not really much is happening, not immediately. And this happened yesterday and today. A monitor was called to escort a student out of class, and the monitor said, I'm not taking them to the office because they're not going to do anything. They were taken to a buddy teacher. That to me is a disconnect in communication with regards to where a student's supposed to go if they're being removed from the classroom due to excessive disruption that has so disrupted a learning environment that all the other students who are interested in learning are being disadvantaged. And we spend a lot of time focusing on that one student or that two students because of their behavior that really takes away the education from the other students in the classroom. And at the same time, and this is my experience today, I have a student who has some anxiety, whatever issues. He forgot to take his medication after lunch, so he goes to the nurse's office to get his medication. I honestly didn't notice. Again, this is the 5th period. It's clear at the end of the day after lunch. He happened to pass by the library. The library noticed he wasn't in uniform. We are a uniform school. He got dress coded. I got an email. This student's going to spend the rest of the afternoon in ISI. Why? Because he's dress coded. What? I have a student who's an amazing student. He's wearing a pair of leotard pants, dress like workout pants instead of slacks. They're the right color, who's now going to ISI for 3 class periods. And we have a student who's cussing up teachers, and not just one class, but every single class. We have to call a monitor because their behavior, they disappear so much. They have to be escorted to the bathroom, 3 periods in a row, and the monitor is refusing to take them to the office, but we're dress coding a kid and they're going into ISI. That's a disconnect. And that's why I think we hear so much about an infraction 1. This kid is going to ISI when this other student, nothing's happening. And when we have students who say, Mister, all you do is say language, because kids are cussing, that's not a result either, right? So what does respect look like? How can we talk about respect in a way that students understand what respect looks like? We have to teach, right? So we talked about fights, we talked about drugs, all these violations. These are things Dr. Trio has talked about that we have to look at as being very serious. For me, in a fight that happens, if someone's throwing furniture, they're damaging. Here's a situation. I had a sub, this was several years ago, covered my class. I have a computer lab next to my class. One of the students broke in, took the fire extinguisher, and sprayed down all the computers. Now, I know that this happened at 3 other schools the same year. The student had 1 day out of school suspension, stayed after school for the remainder of the week to kind of help the maintenance person come in and clean up the mess. Mm-hmm. I was not able to use that lab for almost a month. And we had computer that was damaged, no consequence. That was physical damage to school equipment, no consequence, 1 day out of school. That to me feels like a disconnect. So I'm going to go back to that statement earlier that kids are kids. Discipline and behavior is also discipline and behavior. And when we only look at each incident as a separate incident and we don't tie them together, which someone else brought up, then we are really disservicing the student, and we're not supporting that student in their own growth to become a mature human being and act appropriately in school. The name calling, the put downs, the bullying, and some of those people that are bullying are also bullies, right? If they're being bullied, they're also doing it. So there's a mix where things go around and around. And I want to emphasize this last portion because I think each one of these areas are extremely important. And we're talking about truancy. We talked about this before as 2 different areas, kids ditching class versus a 9-day person who's on a, this is a pattern, right? They're absent for 9 days, they're here 1 day, or they only attend 1 class, but they're not dropped. How serious are we about wanting our kids in our school if we don't drop them and we don't have a conversation with the parent about getting them in school? We have a student that's been absent right now, moving into this semester, almost the entire semester. Conversation with the parent, oh, this happened, that happened. I understand, life happens, but we need your student to be in school, right? Oh, well, we're thinking about doing homeschool, or maybe they're going to go to TUVA. Well, they have work that they could do at home and they could do online, but they're not doing that work. So I can't really see how that will be successful for them. We need to have them in school.
Right. Thank you. We have just a few more
I'm
minutes
sorry.
left.
Thank you very much. So I just
I
wanted real
appreciate
quick,
Mhm.
training. We need training on all of this stuff. Teachers need training, students need training.
All right, thank you. Takeaways are looking at some progressive pieces, revisiting our truancy levels in a serious and making sure that there's consistency in terms of how we're utilizing our code of conduct. Training is huge. And I do appreciate you acknowledging at the forefront that in many ways our administrators, I don't want to say hands are tied, but they have to follow what's in the code of conduct. That's not an optional situation. And so it can look disproportionate depending on what occurs. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you. We have two more people who would like to speak, so if we can be fairly concise, that would be great. The first person is Frankie Maldonado.
Hi. So I think all of this, the forums, the meetings, the Zooms, all of this is amazing. I think it's great. We're looking at changing the code of conduct. The problem I see though, coming from a very small school, we're a K-8, and in the 6 through 8, we have about 130 kids. There's not a lot of kids. The problem that I see is if we change all these things and we make it better, so the defiance and the disrespect, okay, you can't do that, now here's your consequence. We don't have an ISI. We don't have an ISS room. We don't have a dean of students. We don't have a vice principal because we're too small. So who's going to enforce these changes that were going to be made, right? Who is going to be the person who's watching these kids? Because if we just farm them out to elementary school, the middle school part, if we just farm them out to elementary for their ISS, so they're not learning and they're possibly disrupting the littler kids. There has to be, when we look at this, some considerations put in for FTEs, for people to help make this all work. Because if we change everything, but we don't change the staffing needs, then is it going to be implementable, if that's a word? Or is it going to be worth it? So I love all of the suggestions. I agree that with almost everything everybody was saying, but as a part of that, I think we also need to look at the smaller schools and how they're going to make these changes work for them. And I think that's something that we might miss now and then. The staffing needs to make this a feasible endeavor. Thank you for letting me talk.
Oh, not an issue. We appreciate your input completely. And you are very much in line with our elementary administrators that sit on the steering committee in terms of looking at that staffing piece in part. You're not the first person to bring up that concern from our smaller elementaries. So I appreciate that. That adds to that voice for sure.
Great, thank you. I'm not sure if she's still here, Susanna Peterson. She may have had to hop off. All right, Susanna was our last speaker, and we are at time. And then so I did put in the chat the email for the Code of Conduct Committee, if you think of anything afterwards that you would want to share with them, as well as the Code of Conduct webpage, where you can see all the information, past videos, so you can hear other people's comments if you want to see if something has already been shared. And with that, Anna, do you have any other last comments?
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I really appreciate everyone, all of your stakeholder input, and we're putting that all together, and that will inform all of our decision making moving forward. So just thanks again for spending a little bit of your evening with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.